Welcome to Lawyer Business Advantage. This podcast is dedicated to helping attorneys earn more money, get better clients, and spend more time with family. I'm your host, Alay and founder of law firm Success Group. Smart business guidance for small law firms begins in 3, 2, 1. And it's my pleasure to welcome to Lawyer Business Advantage Richard Brock, founder and CEO of Onboard Legal, and also a recently published Amazon best-selling author. Richard, welcome to Lawyer Business Advantage.
Thank you, Alay. I appreciate that. I'm very glad to be here.
We talk about legal recruiting. There's a lot of different things that are out there, but you are absolutely crushing it with this approach of modern recruiting. What is modern recruiting?
So, well, I'm glad you asked. So I'm a lawyer by background. I practiced for about 5 years before I got into the legal recruiting business, which I'm going to be aging myself a little bit, but I've been in the lawyer recruiting business for over 20 years now. And, being in it that long, it occurred to me that parts of the legal recruiting process were a little bit flawed. And what I mean by that is, it seemed to me it was really geared more towards the best interests of the search firm rather than the law firm. They're the ones who are actually paying the fee, who actually need the talent. So we structured our business so that we are serving the best interest of the law firm. We call it modern recruiting. We also call it client side recruiting.
So let me dive a little bit deeper into that with you. What were some of the specific issues that you were seeing where the recruiters are structuring the business deal in their favor, and what are some of the changes you've made accordingly?
Yeah, well, and I want to be clear. I don't mean to imply that the recruiters are doing anything wrong or anything nefarious, because that's not the case. But it was not serving the law firm's best interest. And here's what I mean by that. The way most legal recruiting firms operate, I can't speak for all, but I know most of them, the way they operate is they focus heavily on getting a candidate, and then they market that candidate to 4, 5, 6 different law firms. If a bidding war ensues, all the better. And then somebody's going to hire that person, search firm collects a fee, and search firms happy, candidates happy. The law firms who did not hire this individual are not happy, because they thought, justifiably so, that they had a relationship with the recruiter, that the recruiter was working for their best interests. And it turns out that was not really the case. They weren't working against the law firm, but they weren't really working specifically for the law firm. So what we did that's a little different, when we engage with a client, generally speaking, we work specifically for that client. They tell us, we specifically want you to go out and find XYZ, and we go out and find XYZ, as opposed to sort of going after the lowest hanging fruit and marketing those candidates. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I've been in that business. My former legal recruiting firm that I had in the 2000s, that's how we operated. It's a perfectly fine business, but we were hearing so many complaints from law firms about a couple of things. I said, look, one, we thought they were working for us, ends up they're recruiting for us and 4 of our closest competitors, and it seems like they get more of the talent than we do. And then 2, they hated not having anybody who was going after what their specific needs were. It's like they would say, okay, listen, we need a real estate lawyer in Los Angeles. And what they would be getting were litigators in San Francisco. And while there's nothing wrong with litigators in San Francisco, and sometimes they would hire the litigators from San Francisco, it wasn't filling their most pressing needs. So so we structured our recruiting firm differently with the law firm in mind.
So let me just take a step back here for folks that may not be as familiar, like the attorney entrepreneurs who are listening, that may not be as familiar with recruiting as you are, and I am a little bit.
Sure.
I'm aware of 2 basic models that are out there. There's a contingency search and there's a retained search. And contingency search, for you all who are listening, is a typical one that you hear about, where the recruiter doesn't get paid until the candidate actually lands with a firm, and then the firm pays the recruiter a fee for that. Retained search is where typically the recruiter works for the law firm, and the law firm pays the recruiter to conduct a search with no guarantee that they're going to find somebody. So those are the 2 models I'm familiar with. Richard, how's what you're doing kind of fall into those?
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point, and that's probably the majority of legal search firms out there, and the majority of the searches they conduct are done on a contingency basis, and that's why they tend to go after the lowest hanging fruit, right? Because they don't get paid unless there is a placement. So again, I'm not knocking that. It's just that's not the way we do it. We do operate on a retainer, and that enables us to devote the resources that are required to conduct searches the right way so that we are going after specifically what our clients ask us for.
Which is really cool because at that point you're kind of like a fractional recruiter, right? They
Yeah.
don't have a full-time recruiter, so they can work with you on a fractional basis, part-time basis, and you will work for that firm, and you and your team will go out and get them the talent they're looking for.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's really it. I like. In fact, I've not heard that description about a fractional recruiter, but I like it because the concept really applies. Like a fractional CFO, fractional CMO. Um, it really seems to work well. The law firms like it, and we view ourselves as an extension of our law firm clients, right? I mean, everybody in our business talks about relationships, and that's real, and talks about partnerships, but the way our business model works, we really are a partner. We really are an extension of what they're doing. Yeah, and they are paying for that. But that's why it works.
Yeah, no charge on the fractional recruiter, by the way. You can use that as much as you like.
I may do that. I may take that from you.
But one of the things I'm interested with in this approach is what size firms do you typically work with?
So we short version is we will work with all size firms from 20 law or 10 lawyer firms up to over 1,000. We've really kind of figured that learned that our sweet spot is really firms with 100 to 600 lawyers, usually who have more than one office and who are really in an active growth mindset. We coined the term right size firms. That we serve right size law firms, and those are the three criteria: 100 to 600. Approximately. If a firm has 80 or a firm has 650, that's okay. But generally, 100 to 600 lawyers, two or more physical offices, and an active growth mindset, which some firms have and some firms don't. And
Right.
it's fine. And it's fine if a firm doesn't. But if you don't have an active growth mindset, you're not going to be interested in our services and our model.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so at Law Firm Success Group, what we do is we work with, really small firms, think like 2 partners or less. So oftentimes they don't even have 10 attorneys. But I think some of the challenges they're encountering are some of the challenges that your right size firms are encountering, which is namely, I'm looking to get talent. It's one of the tightest markets I've ever seen as an attorney. How do I compete with my limited resources against larger firms that can pay attorneys more money?
Yeah.
And you have to represent these firms to candidates, and now you're selling the firm to candidates. What are some of the things that you use to position those smaller firms favorably?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, and small firms, their talent needs they don't arise as often as larger firms, but when they arise, they're really more acute, right? Because if you're in a 2 or 3 lawyer firm and you find yourself shorthanded, you're really shorthanded. So I certainly understand that. There's actually a chapter in my book where I talk about smaller firms and recruiting talent when you're in a smaller firm, and the advantages and disadvantages that you have. The disadvantages, I'm sure your audience is largely familiar with. One, if you're a lawyer in a smaller firm, you typically don't have as much time, right? Because you're practicing law full time and then some, plus operating the business in a lot of instances. Two, not always, but generally, smaller firms are going to find themselves at a compensation disadvantage. But smaller firms do have a couple of big advantages that smaller firms don't, and so I encourage smaller firms to really play on these advantages because they matter. First and foremost, smaller firms typically have a really good culture. If you've got two, three, four lawyers who are practicing together, usually those lawyers like practicing together. They like what they've built. They like the culture that they have. Another one, smaller firms, lawyers in a smaller firm, even if you're a new hire, even if you're an associate, you have a fair amount of influence on that firm. You know, your voice actually matters. If you're one voice in a 3 or 4 lawyer firm, you know, that's going to carry a lot more weight than if you're one voice in a 400 or 800 lawyer firm. And that's important. You know, a common complaint that I hear from candidates is, you know, I just feel like, you know, my voice doesn't matter. My opinion doesn't matter. You know, rather than being asked how things should be, I'm told how things are going to be. So those are, you know, advantages like that, you know, culture, influence, camaraderie among the firm, all of those aspects matter. Autonomy is another big one that smaller firms, you know, when you're in a larger firm, certainly not all firms, but some of them, you know, you don't have total control over your practice, over your billing rates, over, you know, you run into conflicts a lot. So you don't, you know, so you may not be able to represent some of the clients you want. You rarely run into those issues in smaller firms. So, you know, so there are advantages. There are definite competitive advantages that smaller firms have. And those, you know, don't beat your head against a wall because you can't compete as much on compensation. Instead, emphasize where you do have advantages.
Love that, Richard, and your perspective about having a louder voice, having more influence in the firm is really insightful. That's not something that I really thought of before, and so I really appreciate that perspective. Let's talk a little bit about your book, Win the Talent Game. What inspired you to write that book?
You know, writing a book, it's something that I've always wanted to do. It's been a life, candidly, kind of a lifelong goal of mine. And I don't know about the rest of you. I sort of learned that I'm not getting any younger. So I realized that if I don't go ahead and write it, then, you know, then time was not on my side. So I have been in the business a long time. I feel like I've got a pretty solid knowledge base from which to write on this topic. And so, you know, candidly, a couple of years ago, I just started writing it. It really, I'd love to tell you I had some, you know, road to Damascus moment or something, but, you know, I just kind of started writing, and it sort of started flowing, and I just continued with it. And I was fortunate to be able to do it. And and it just came out a couple of months ago, and you were nice to mention we did hit Amazon bestseller, so we're very happy about that. And it's been great.
Congratulations. Who is the book written for?
So the book is really written for two audiences. It is it is all about the competition for talent in the legal industry. You know, it is generally geared towards, you know, the firms who represent, you know, corporate America, you know, financial institutions, insurance companies, hospitals, you know, and the like. And that's mainly because the economic model is different. You know, the economic model in those types of firms, whether they're 5 lawyers or 500 lawyers, just, you know, the revenue model is different than lawyers who typically represent individuals who represent consumers. You know, consumer bankruptcy, criminal, divorce, Social Security, disability. You know, it's just a different economic model. So, so the book was generally written for the firms who represent corporate America, as well as individual attorneys who are thinking about possibly making a career move. And so it's really, the book is really intended to be a guideline, both for the hiring party, the law firm, as well as the individual attorney who is exploring other options. And usually that's how most attorneys are. You know, most attorneys have a good job. They're not, you know, quote unquote, looking for a job, but they're willing to listen. You know, they're willing to listen and consider if something else out there may be better than their current situation. And so that's really who the target audience is.
That's really interesting. So you've taken two really different target audiences and put them into one book. You could have almost written two different books, one for
Yeah.
the firm and one for the attorney. And what was the reasoning, or what were you thinking when you decided to put them both together in one book? What are some of the advantages that has?
It's and having gone through the process, I'm glad I decided to go with one book instead of two. But it's really because when you're in my business, you really are serving both groups, right? Now, our clients are the law firms and sometimes corporate legal departments. We do work with companies and their in-house counsel on filling their needs. But generally speaking, we have to serve both the law firms, and they are our client, but we also have to serve the talent, the candidates, because that's really our product. We can have the best sales pitch in the world to the law firm or to the corporate legal department, but unless we're supplying them with the talent they're looking for, then we're not doing our job. And in order to do that, in order to supply that talent, we have to be knowledgeable, we have to be skilled, we have to have a high level of communication with the individuals, with the candidates. So we really are working on both sides of the fence to make a deal. I mean, we are essentially brokers is what we are.
I think it's really interesting that you recognize that you serve both of those audiences, and clearly you take that responsibility very seriously. I don't want to talk so much more about recruiters, but let's talk a little bit more about the book and what's in there. So if I'm a owner of a law firm, what are a few points that I can take away from reading the book?
Yeah. So, one of the big ones, especially if you're a leader, and I've mentioned this, a lot of this is just based on the advice that we've given our clients through the years. But one of the big ones is the involvement of firm leadership makes a huge difference. The firms that tend to do the best at hiring, and this would also be, I think, a good bit of advice for your audience, who whether they need to hire an associate, whether they want a partner, even if they want to hire a secretary or a file clerk, it doesn't matter. The principle is the same. If firm leadership makes that a priority and takes the time to be involved, that sets the tone. That makes a huge difference. That tells the candidate for whatever position that he or she matters. This is important. If you end up joining this firm, you will be an important component of what we're doing here, and that really makes a big difference. That would be number one. Number two, I would say, and this really applies to both the law firm as well as the individual, you need to approach it with a humble attitude and know that you are actually the seller and not, you're the buyer, but you're also the seller. A mistake that some firms make, and I've seen some individuals make the same mistake, is they go into these conversations with a pretty high opinion of themselves, or a pretty high opinion of their firm, and they sort of take the attitude of, well, somebody would be lucky to work here, or from the individual's perspective, somebody would be lucky to have me. And that may very well be true, and it probably is true, but that attitude, that perspective turns people off. Yeah, it just does. Most people are not attracted to arrogance. They're just, they're just not. So we always encourage our law firms, like, look, you've got a great firm. Y'all have built a fantastic organization. But when it comes to recruiting and selling, it's just that simple. Recruiting and selling, to me, are virtually synonymous. So the people that you want, they're not looking for a job. They have a job. They want to know if an opportunity with your firm might be even better. So your job is to sell them on that. Obviously, truthfully, factually, but sell them on the opportunity, sell them on the advantages. Don't go into it thinking, hey, I could take you or leave you. You'd be lucky to work here. And I think more and more firms are getting wise about that. But that will be my second main piece of advice. And again, same Flip side of that is also true. When lawyers go into these meetings with a prospective law firm that they're thinking about joining, they're being recruited, and they go into it with sort of a haughty attitude, it usually ends that day. It usually doesn't go any further.
Awesome. Those are great tips. And I can really see that playing out because, in the past where there was maybe more lawyers in the job market, it was easier for law firms to have maybe more of an attitude of an arrogance, like you mentioned. And then, as a candidate, it feels really cool when there's a firm that wants to recruit you and wants you there. And it's kind of a neat feeling, and you never know how people are going to react to that. So excellent points. That book is Win the Talent Game. It's on Amazon. Richard, do you have an audiobook as well?
We do not have an audiobook at this time. There may be one forthcoming, but right now it's in print as well as Kindle.
Got it. One of my clients, by the way, gave me some advice. She said, you have to do an audiobook. And I did. And it went really, really well. It was a fun experience. The book has gone really well on audio. You have a fantastic voice, so I hope you consider that.
Thank you.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to with your firm over the next year and a half?
Yeah. So we're fortunate. We have been growing, and we, candidly, our plan over the next year or year and a half is to continue on our growth trajectory, to continue, working with prominent law firms across the country. We are sort of just beginning to think about expanding our service into Canada. We haven't done it yet, but we're sort of having initial conversations with some folks who have been doing in Canada, trying to learn, what are the pitfalls? What do we need to be aware of? What are the differences between, running a service business in the US and running one in Canada? So that we think that's on the horizon.
That's exciting. Richard, congratulations on your success. And if people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So probably the best way to do that would be through my company's website. That's onboardlegal.com. And there's also a website that's specifically for my book, which is just my name. It's richardbrock.com. Either one of those.
Awesome. Richard, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today.
Hey, Alay, this has been great. I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you having me on.
Everyone, that's Richard Brock, founder and CEO of Onboard Legal. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Lawyer Business Advantage podcast. One thing that would really help both us and other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you tune in to listen. And I want to hear from you, so connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you think of this episode. And if you are a solo or an owner of a small law firm and you're looking to earn more money, attract better clients, or reduce your stress, we would love to talk with you to see how we can help. Request your free law firm assessment by visiting lawfirmsuccessgroup.com. Again, that URL is lawfirmsuccessgroup.com. We look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you for listening. My name is Alay Yajnik. Until next time, remember, you can seize freedom, you can embrace happiness, you can build your perfect practice.